Cool. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Horner. I'm an Android developer at a company called Gridstone, based out of Melbourne, Australia. And I'm a developer that really likes user interfaces. It's the reason I'm a developer, is making those really slick UIs, right? And before I touch on why I think the transitions framework is really useful to deliver those slick user interfaces, and why it's kind of interesting to do outside of the context of activities and fragments, I kind of just want to touch on like why it's important for UX, right? Because I know the material design spec came out, right? And I was really like wowed by this. It was really flashy, right? Like we had items appearing in a list, and then things were like growing, and then like we'd go to the details screen, and there's text that's like flying in, and it was really cool, right? And the part of me that liked this, wasn't the part that said, yes, that is very much going to improve the usability of my application. That's good. No, the part of me that thought this was cool was the kid that used to have a Linux desktop like this, and there's windows flying everywhere, and they explode into like a cloud of fire, like when you close them, and it was, please don't judge me too harshly. I thought this was awesome. No, there's actually like a UX gain to be had here, where we build our applications one screen at a time, right? And we send the user from one, then off to the other, and it's just like, well, what context did the user have? They've kind of lost it as they've moved throughout our application. What were they doing there? And this is kind of interesting, right? Where I don't know if I'm the only one that does this, but you you walk from one room into the next one, and you think, why am I here? What was I doing? I came into this room for something, but I can't remember what it was. I've forgotten what that was. And there's actually an interesting study done by the University of Notre Dame about this. It's a lengthy title. They called it Walking Through Doorways Causes Forgetting, Situation Models and Experience Space. Now, it's a lengthy title, but basically the gist of the study was that people are really bad at remembering things when they change rooms. That walking through a doorway is enough to lose that context, and they're much better at remembering them if they stay inside the one room. And I first started noticing that this maybe applies to software as well. Everyone's favorite operating system, Windows 7, had this, you could press the start button, right? And then you could type in the name of a file or a program or anything. And you could just do that in the middle of a workflow and bring something up. It was very useful. And then came everyone's next favorite operating system, Windows 8, where you'd press the start button, and what you would see was this. And it was kind of the same thing, right? Where you'd press that start button, and you'd be like, what was I doing? I was opening something, but I can't remember what it was. So this is really where I started to think, hey, there's some usability gains to be had here. And I think a lot of people say, well, like that's all well and good, but why do I need the transitions framework to do that? I mean, I've already got my animator code, right? Like this code is very comforting. We're all familiar with this. It's like, hey, I can make an object animator, and it kind of does what I want. Why would I care about the transitions API? To me, there's two big benefits with the transitions API. The first one is that it's far easier to compose them than animator code, so you can kind of create these generic transitions and reuse them throughout your application. The other big benefit is that they allow for these shared element transitions, and that's really what lets us carry the user's context as we push them through all of the different screens inside of our apps. So, okay, you're interested in learning about transitions. What's the typical path that an Android developer goes down when they're learning about the transitions API? So they go into the developer documentation, and there's something about scenes, and you're like, okay, I need scenes. And then they're like, actually, no, you can do them without scenes. You're like, oh, okay, do I need scenes? Maybe I don't need scenes, I'm not sure. I'll watch a Google I/O presentation. They're usually pretty good. This will make things a bit clearer for me. And then in the middle of that presentation, they make this call, make scene transition animation off an activity. And you're like, okay, that's nice, but it doesn't really apply to how I make my activities. I mean, I just watched this talk from Square, right? And this guy was up on the stage, and he was telling me that fragments were really bad and that I shouldn't be using them. And I know I've kind of like enjoyed building these view-based applications. And I kind of want to clarify here that this talk isn't about bashing on fragments. As we saw before, many people are still using them, and they're kind of great for a lot of things. However, there's also a lot of people out there who aren't using fragments, people who have adopted one of these libraries. It's just a quick search, right, of any of these view-based libraries, and there's lots, like an awful lot. One of them's mine. I don't know why I made it. But there's kind of two aspects to this talk that I want to talk about. The first one is there are times, right, either it's your entire application or one part of it where you've got some view group, right, and then you're populating the first screen, and you're using a view to do that, and then you're navigating to the second screen, so you're populating another view, slides in, great. And the other time is where you've heard about this called begin delayed transition, and you were told that this call solves all of your problems. Chat's done all of the work for you, and the animation's just going to execute by itself, and it's going to look wonderful. And then you go about putting it inside of your application, and what you get really isn't what you expected. So how do you go about debugging that? That can actually be really tricky. So let's look at these two scenarios. So the first one on simple layout changes, I actually want to touch on something that's kind of been forgotten, I feel. Let's just take a simple layout here. We've got a linear layout. It's not particularly interesting, right? It's vertical. And at some point in my app, I've got this blue view, and I want to make it visible. So I change its visibility to visible. Great, but rather than just snapping into place, I would like it to animate. So we can do that by adding this animate layout changes true flag to XML. And this actually should give us a nice little animation. Things move out of the way and it fades in, it fades out. And this was added all the way back in Honeycomb, but we forgot that it existed. What's important to note though is I started preparing for this presentation, and that's the behavior I remembered. But then this is what I got. It's important to note that Oreo actually changed the behavior of this flag. So now you actually get the fade and the move at the same time. So just keep that in mind when you're building your app. Might not be what you want. And the last little trick of old APIs I'd like to look at is this changing bounds transition you can get. So if you've got that XML flag enabled, you can then pull out the transition type from your container and say, hey, I want to enable layout transition changing. So if at any point inside of your app, you're changing the bounds, it's actually going to animate that for you, which is pretty neat. Okay, but what about if we want to use the transition manager? So we'll get rid of our animate layout changes attribute on our XML. And what are we going to do? Well, we'll call that begin delayed transition call on our container. And we're just going to say, hey, the next change after that is we're going to make our view visible. And look at that. We get exactly the same sort of behavior that we had for our pre-Oreo animate layout changes, which is neat. You're like, okay, well, that's fine. What about when things get a little bit more complicated, right? Like, these are all kind of contrived. What about a real-world example? So I want to talk about an app that I've been working on a little bit lately. You don't need to understand too much about it, but it's kind of an interesting app. We've got this idea of, there's a fab down the bottom of the screen on the left there. The user can press that fab, loads up this alarm screen. They can press a help button, and when they press the help button, it goes into this triggered state. So the user can sort of say, hey, I'm calling for help, and our buttons change state as well. So I think this is interesting, right, because we're going through one screen to another, and then one screen is just changing state from one to another. So let's be developers together. This is the animation the design team has given us, and we need to implement what's going on here. Now it's kind of a little bit hard to follow, right? It's very fast. Let's slow it down. So we've got a shared element transition of our floating action button, and then we've kind of got some views fading in and out of existence, and things sliding back down. All right, well, how are we going to build that? Well, I first want to look at this example of one screen changing from one state to another, because I think it's a little bit simpler to reason about than actually navigating between two different screens. And I think when we start building things, it's always good to come up with a simple version. So together as developers, we're going to build this. This is our first pass. It doesn't need to be terribly complicated, right? Looks like a linear layout to me. We've got a text view, a couple of them, space and some buttons, fine. except we know that that's not quite going to be enough because we've got to have this map view that's going to be sitting behind here. So what are we going to do? Well, we can actually put everything inside of a frame layout and we'll say, all right, well, our map and text can just sit behind this linear layout because the linear layout's really what we care about. It's what we're animating. So we're going to give that linear layout a white background. It's important to note that because this linear layout is going to start out with these layout dimensions of match parent and match parent. And the way we want it to shrink down is we're going to say, hey, we'll give you a height of wrap content. So how are we going to do that? It's fine. We'll just set a click listener on one of our buttons, and we'll say, yep, I'll get the layout parameters, and I'll set your height to wrap content. So what happens when we animate that? Whoa, it's a bit hard to see that fast. Let's slow it down. So we can see our views fade out, it slides down, and then the I'm OK button fades into place, which is actually kind of close to what we want in the end result, right? Like it's nearly there, but not quite. Things are happening one after the other, and we want everything to happen at the same time. It's a very fast animation. So what do we do? Really, we want to look at this begin delayed transition call. We want to say, how are we going to customize this? And the API lets us do that. The second parameter that we can pass into that call is a custom transition. So let's make one. Important to note here, I'm very deliberately constructing this in Java because that's another thing I feel all examples out there are doing it with XML. And to me, especially when I'm starting to make these animations, it's much easier to just hack them together quickly with Java and then maybe promote them to XML later when I want to kind of build that reusable system, right? So we'll start by making a transition set. Transition set is exactly what you think it is. It's just a set of transitions. We know we're going to need more than one. Then we're like, okay, well, I need to fade some of my items in or out. I know I've been told that the transitions framework looks at where things were at the start of a change and where they're going, and it will take care of it for me. So this is going to fade all of the different text views and buttons for me. And then I need to change bounds. It's just that linear layout is going to shrink a little bit. Great. So I put all of that together, and it should work, right? Who thinks this is going to work? All right, you were all way smarter than I was when I was trying to build this. This doesn't work at all. Things get really funky. It's kind of fast. Let's slow it down. We've got the shrink, which is fine, but our call button and our other buttons are kind of stuck to the top of the layout, which is weird. So I think this is actually where a lot of people bounce off of the transitions API, where something strange starts to happen. And you're like, how do I debug this? What's going on? And I think a good place to start is this change bounds. Change bounds is always where problems occur, I find. Always start looking there. Because we see our call button, what if we were to just add that to the change bounds? If we make that another target of this transition, then what happens? So now our call button stays in place. So that's kind of a good start, right? Because actually it does need to change bounds. Relative to its parent, it is changing bounds. It was sort of further down. And then at the end of this transition, it's actually right near the top of the linear layout. Okay, well, that solved all of our problems, right? By that logic, I should be able to say the OK button and the help button, I can add them to this change bounds too as well, right? No, you can't. And the reason you can't do that is because transitions work by looking at where things were and where they're going. And some of these buttons, either at the start or at the end, they have no position. What bounds are they changing from? They can't do that, so that's not going to work. Really, we've kind of got this big problem, right, of this linear layout resizing. It's making this transition very difficult. We need to go back and look at our layout. What's going on? What can we change here to make our lives a little bit easier? Now, it may not be the most efficient thing in the world, but the first thing I thought is, yes, what if I just pulled this view out, right? What if that white background were just a view and it wasn't affecting the position of other elements on screen at once? What if I just animated that? That's pretty easy. And I think, okay, well, now I've got all these items in a linear layout and I don't want them to change positions, so does that mean I can kind of fix things by using these two linear layouts? And then it's like, oh, well, that's starting to get a little bit messy, right? And then what happens with this background view? I mean, like, I know it's going to go from match parent, but then how big does it get? It needs to be the same height as this wrap content linear layout down the bottom, and it's kind of all falling apart very quickly. And I know a lot of you are thinking this as well. It's just like, why don't we just use a constraint layout? It just solves all of our problems, makes things so much easier. So we will. And all we need to do is add a guideline as well. We're just going to say, hey, it's roughly 60% of the way down the screen. And that's going to be the anchor point for that background that slides down, and it's going to be the anchor point that the buttons are going to sit on. But we get one other huge advantage when we use constraint layout as well, and that's that we get to use constraint set. Constraint sets are pretty cool. So a constraint set is kind of like a recording of all of the constraints that a constraint layout is currently putting on its children, and you get to bundle that up in an object and then sort of store that state, which is neat. They've got a strange API, so let's run through what's going on over here. We know we need two states, one for when this screen is sort of idle, when the user is, they're still okay, they don't need help. And then at one point they do need help, so we go into that triggered state. So we need another one for that. And we're going to start by cloning them from the container. So that populates the constraint set with the current state of a constraint layout. So we know that the idle state's going to be fine. Our XML is set up for our view when it's in the idle state. But we need to modify what's going on in that triggered state. So the changes that we're going to be making, I don't know, they're kind of simple, right? Like I don't mind these set visibility calls. I understand them. The connect call's a bit funky. What's going on there? So just to quickly explain what's happening, we're saying, hey, for this white background view, it's constraint top. So whenever you're saying like, hey, constraint the top of this view to the top of this view kind of thing in your constraint layout, we're saying take the top constraint and then constrain that to the top of the guideline view. So we know that that's going to change the size. And then we want to animate it. And it gets kind of easy. Let's forget about the custom transition we made for the moment because things were sort of not really working. We'll go back to the default one, and we're just going to apply this constraint set to the container. And we'll animate it. So things fade out, goes down, comes back in. And you may be thinking, well, okay, that's fine, but we're kind of back where we started, right? We haven't gained anything. However, we are in a much better spot now. Our layout is much more flexible. What's happening under the hood here, right? Like what is the transitions framework doing for you? And by default, this second parameter is going to be an auto transition. And this auto transition is really close to what we want, just kind of playing sequentially instead of all at once. So let's have a look at the source. So looking at that, it kind of tells us, yeah, like I kind of need to make a transition set, but without all of this stuff. So taking inspiration from the default auto transition source, let's make one, right? Like we can just say, hey, we don't care about fading in or out one after the other. We just want to fade. Everything come in, everything go, fine. And we just want to change bounds of the things that are going to change bounds. So let's do it. Hey, it's pretty close to what we want, right? Like it's not quite there. I mean, our text is like fading at the same time as the thing is scrolling down, but we're nearly there. We just need to customize it a bit. So how are we going to customize this transition? Well, we kind of need two fades, one for the title and the instructions text up the top. That's going to happen really, really quickly. We want that to get out of the way before the slides, kind of even like there. And we'll increase the duration on the other fades and the change bounds. So what do we get? Great, that's exactly what we want. Cool. So sometimes it can take a little bit of tweaking with your layout to get where you need to go. That's fine of a screen that changes state, but what about those times when you're actually navigating from one screen to another? So it's this example here where we're on the home screen and the user can hit that fab down the bottom and they can get to the alarm screen. How are we doing that with our transition? So let's have a look at this layout. We'll tap that fab, and it's going to slide up from the bottom like that. So again, I think it's always good to start by making a simple version. So let's come up as developers together. This is our first pass at this. So we'll make a home screen. It doesn't need to be pretty, right? It's the same. We've already got our view on the right that has our constraint layout. We were very happy with that. We've just added this nice red-orange fab to it. But let's look at the home screen. Let's make it dumb for now. I don't want to make it more complicated than that. It's just a frame layout. It's got some text, bottom navigation view, and a floating action button with the gravity of bottom. So they sit at the bottom of a frame layout. So let's let's think about what we're doing here, right? The way we're kind of setting things up is we've got this view group, and then we start by saying, okay, well, the first view inside of my view group is this home screen, and then that gets pulled out, and then we add the alarm screen to that. So it's similar to what we were thinking about before, right? Where we just need to begin a delayed transition here. And the only difference is we're saying, hey, we're just actually going to remove an entire home view, and we're going to add the alarm view here, which is neat, right? So what if we start experimenting with this? What can we learn? So let's start by saying, like, what happens if I just plug a fade transition in there? What does that look like? Well, I mean, it's not great, right? But it's exactly what you expect. It does what it says on the tin, where the home view is just going to fade out. Like, fine. What about slides? Sliding's cool. Sliding's interesting. Not quite what we're after, but you know, it's kind of getting there. But slides kind of neat to look at, because you can do a lot with it. I know a transition that everyone likes to use a lot inside of their applications is your view that you're on slides off to the left, and then the view that you're going to slides on from the right. And you can do this really easily with transitions as well. You can just say, hey, I want to start a slide, target the home view, and it's going to go to the start gravity. So because it's disappearing, it's going to go to the start edge. And then our alarm view is coming from the end gravity, and because it didn't exist and it's going to exist, that's going to slide in from the end. And so we get everyone's favorite transition, right, of sliding from one screen to another. Which is fine, but it's not what we want. We want to do better than that. So let's customize things. We're going to be explicit about our alarm view sliding in from the bottom. And what does that look like? It's kind of like the alarm view sliding in is what we want, but it's weird how our home screen just kind of like blinks out of existence. Why is it doing that? Well, my first thought when I was working on this was like, well, it's not part of the transition. I've removed it from that view group, and because it's not part of the transition, then it's not being displayed for me. So clearly I need to add it to that transition. I don't need it to do anything. So does that mean I can be a bit cheeky? Does that mean that I could just be like, hey, it's gonna fade, right? But it's actually gonna start 300 milliseconds later and then run for no milliseconds. Because now the transition manager knows about it, right? It should display. No, you can't do that either. What actually happens is for 300 milliseconds, you see this view, and then you see this view. So it didn't really work out. The slide is actually still going on underneath, but you can't cheat that way. And the reason you can't cheat that way, right, is the transition we're doing, what we're changing to the layout is we're removing the home view and we're adding the alarm view. So it's gone. And Android needs to like fake how the home view sticks around. And it does that by using a view group overlay, which is really interesting. A view group overlay is something that every view group has where it can render things on top of its children. It's always going to be on top. It's quite fascinating. If you want some light reading on a Sunday night, I highly recommend you look at ghostview.java. That's great. Super fascinating. But the point is that's no good for us because we want our home screen to be underneath our alarm screen. This is kind of what we're going for. And how are we going to do that? We really need our home screen to stick around. We don't want to remove it immediately. We need to remove it later, which is normally easy, except if you're using some sort of library that manages these transitions for you. I know a lot of them impose these restrictions of like, yes, you're going to make all of your individual screens, and then I'll take care of inflating the layouts for you, and then pushing and popping them for you. But that's no good when you need to really customize the behavior of your animations. You need to read this carefully, so just watch out for that. Like, okay, well, let's customize this. Look at these two lines here. We're removing a home view and adding the alarm view. Well, let's just get rid of that line where we remove the home view. It's going to stick around for a little bit longer. And then we just need to say, hey, when our transition ends, we're going to take care of removing the home view for you. Not too bad. So what happens? Hey, we get exactly what we were looking for. That's kind of nice. All right. Getting there, but now we want to share some elements. That fab still needs to sort of slide up across the two views. So we take a look at our transition again. What are we going to do? Well, always, it's our friend change bounds, because we want to create a shared element transition between these two different views. We add both of them as targets to change bounds, and we think that should be enough, right? Well, no, nothing changed. That's kind of interesting. Well, the first thing that I noticed, right, is that the fab on the alarm view is actually sliding with the content as well. So maybe I need to break things up, right? I want to animate the content of the alarm screen and the fab separately, independently from each other. And then you may be thinking, well, Chris, I've already learnt about this. Isn't there this concept of a transition group, right? And then every single view group in Android that gets given a background is implicitly treated as a group for the sake of transitions, unless I add this flag. Not quite what we want, right? Because we actually want to treat this as like a separate content container. We want to move the container itself as a view in the transition. So we're going to have to break things up a little bit. It may not be what you want, but it's just a frame layout. It's not too scary. And if we do that, now we get to control things a little bit more independently. So if we go back to our transition here, the one change that we need to make is we need to say, hey, rather than sliding in the entire alarm view, we're just going to be sliding in the content container. And then our change bounds, right, that's operating on the fab. So now that's independent from our container. So what happens? All right, well, it's a step in the right direction. We're still not there yet. It's kind of blinking up into place. What do we do about that? Well, the problem here is we actually need to remove the home view fab. Because we're not removing the home view anymore, it still exists for the duration of the transition. So the transitions framework's like, well, what am I animating from and to? It's still there. Like, it's not a shared element. Nothing's disappeared. My next thought was actually to set the visibility to gone, because I kind of maybe want to come back to this home view at some point, what's going on there. But no, you cannot set a view to invisible or gone and have a shared element transition work. You actually have to completely remove it from the layout for a shared element transition to work. And that's one of the really big gotchas. So if we do that, hey, we get the shared element transition that we were looking for. The other thing that's important to note, though, throughout this entire example is with the two XML files we've been using, our ID for the two elements has been the same. And that means that the transitions framework can work out that they're going to be used in that shared element transition. If you, for some reason, don't want your IDs to be the same, then you can actually just add this transition name property there. And that's enough of a hint for the transitions library to be like, yep, okay, we're going to do a shared element transition. Well, that's fine. I want to look at something that's kind of the same, but a little bit different. So let's build a new app now. What we want to do is have some sort of searching application where people can look up things about the transitions library. We've got this home screen with a search bar, and then they can tap on that search bar and they can input some text. What's interesting about this example is there's kind of two ways to approach it, right? Where is it one screen navigating to another, or is it one screen changing state? And you can kind of approach it both ways. I personally like to approach it as one screen navigating to another because the functionality is very different, right? What I'm doing on the searching screen, I don't really want to have to deal at the same time on my home screen, and maybe we're using MVP or MVI or MVVM or whatever flavor of the week happens to be. It's easier for you to kind of like keep them as two disparate screens. Okay, what's that animation going to look like? We tap on our search bar, it expands, and then it shrinks back down when they hit back. Let's slow it down a little bit. You can maybe kind of get a feel for what's going on. So we're thinking, yes, it's going to be a shared element transition here of this card view that gets to expand and then shrink back down again. And we've got this background that's going to fade in. So like always, we need to understand our layouts. Let's have a look. What's our home screen doing? Well, again, it looks like a linear layout to me, right? Just a vertical linear layout. We've got our app bar. We've got a card view. We've got a text view. We're going to use a compound drawable because I hear that's all the rage, right? That's displaying our little mascot. And then around our mascot, we've got two spaces with weights of 1, and that's going to center it inside of our linear layout. On our next layout, we're going to say, okay, well, I just need a frame layout. Doesn't need to be complicated. I need to render this scrim, this idea of this translucent black background that's kind of going to defocus things and say, hey, user, you're on this page now, but you're kind of still floating on top of where you came from, so they don't lose their context. The card view's got quite a lot of stuff going on inside of it. It's not terribly important, but the image button to go back and then a recycler view to display all of the recent searches that the user's done. We're already smarter than this, though. We know that that's going to be a nightmare to animate that background separately, so we're just going to pull it out because I find that way easier to manage. And we're going to make sure that both of these elements between our screens, they're going to have that shared element of card. It's the card that we're sharing between the two screens. We're telling the transitions framework about that. So this should be easy, right? We've learned a lot of things now. We need to fade. We're going to say, hey, that scrim view, that's going to fade. And we are going to run our favorite change bounds transition between the home view card and the search view card. So what happens? Oh, and we also need to say, hey, in part of this transition, we're just going to add the search view on top. We're not removing anything. We're just going from one to the other. So it's not great. It's a start. Our background is fading in, which is what we want. But again, our change bounds is like not working properly. And this is actually really similar to the problem we just had, right, of our floating action button during the shared element transition. We haven't removed it from the layout. It's still there. Our home view card is still sitting behind. So we actually need to do something about this. We need to remove that home view card. So this should work. And it does, but there's something kind of funky happening here, right, where our little mascot, she's jumping up and down as we're searching, which is not what we want. It's kind of weird. So why is that happening? So if we go back to our layout, we declared a linear layout, and we've got those two spaces, and they have a layout weight of 1. So they're consuming all of the remaining available space in that layout. So after we remove our card view, there's more space for them to consume. So they do, but we kind of get this jumping effect. So we need a way to mitigate this. We need a way to remove the card view, but still have things sort of like sit pretty. So a little hack I like to use is just adding a frame layout and give it the idea of slot or something. This idea of it's a slot where you can add and remove at different points some view. It's where it's going to live. But if we do that, we should be okay, right? Well, no. That's kind of interesting. We didn't change it. The only thing we changed was the parent of the home view's card view. And now part of our transition is like immediately blinking up to the top of the screen, which is like really strange. Why is that happening? And I think always change bounds is an interesting place to look at, right? What change bounds is doing is it's looking at its position inside of a parent before it starts that transition. So when we put it inside of that slot container, it went from being like sort of a little bit down the screen to now being right at the top of the container. So in this transition, it doesn't actually get to move anymore. We need a way of dealing with reparenting, and that's what change transform does. It actually looks at its global position and says, hey, how am I going to actually transform this back into local coordinates again when we're going between two different parents? So if we add that again, what do we get? Hey, all right, we actually get to animate up. That's really cool. And then going back, that should be easy, right? It's just playing the same thing in reverse. How do we deal with that? All right, it's a water code, but it's not too bad. It's the same as what we had before, right? We're going to fade out our scrim on our search view, and we're just going to set up that shared element transition between the home view card and the search view card. Simple, right? And the other thing we need to make sure is we're going to add the home view card back into the home view, and we need our container to have the entire searching view removed from it. What happens? All right, that's kind of weird. Again, our fade works, faithful fade. but there's something wrong with our card. What's going on there? Well, the thing to note here is we needed to reference the home view's card, but we have to do that when we set up the transition. But because transitions are always about where things are and where they're going, we want that card to be animating back into place. So we can only add that card after we call begin delayed transition. So how do we kind of reference something before it exists? So the real trick for that in Android is to just say, hey, there's an ID. I just reference something by an ID. And that's enough for the transitions framework to be like, okay, you gotcha, I'll look it up when the time comes. So if we do that, hey, we are shrinking back down again. We get the nice transition that we were after. So before I start wrapping things up, I just want to say that transitions aren't perfect. They do have a lot of problems. I think a really common strategy, right, is you're building your application and then you're going to put a toolbar inside of it, and then the user's going to navigate from one screen to the other, and you want the toolbar to stay in place as the content slides underneath it. So the way you'd set that up, right, would be, hey, I'll just use a shared element transition where my toolbar is that shared element. It stays in place. But what happens if we do that? So it's tricky to see, I know, with the lighting, but if you look very closely, you'll see when the transition starts, the elevation on the toolbar disappears. And that's because, hey, we're actually animating something that no longer exists anymore, so the transitions framework cheats, it puts it in the overlay, but Android's view overlay doesn't support elevation. Just doesn't. I know Chet's around at this conference. If you want to go annoy him about it, I'd greatly appreciate it. It's something we need added, I think. So let's give you some debugging tips as well, because it's really hard. Start by knowing your layout hierarchy a lot. You really need to understand what's going on. I can't stress that enough. And don't worry about making small changes to your layout to make a transition work. The other one is that change bounds is kind of cheeky. It's where problems go wrong. If your transition isn't working, it's a really good place to start looking. And the other one is start by implementing a simplified version of your screens. I know the way a lot of us build our apps is the design team comes in, they give us a whole lot of screens, and we build them. And then we think about, okay, well, how am I going to animate between these screens? But you've got a complicated layout that you've set up now, and it can be tricky. So maybe just make a simplified version of that first before you start thinking about like how it can go to your very complicated layout with a lot of views. So some takeaways here are that transitions are really powerful. Please don't ignore them. You can do so much, right? From the idea that they're really, really composable to the fact that they give us access to shared elements, I think they're kind of great compared to just normal animators. And the other one is if you're using one of those view-based navigation libraries, really look at the documentation carefully. It's where things can go wrong if they don't give you enough flexibility and power. My personal recommendation on this one is Conductor. I think it's really, really nice. I know they've got some stuff on the horizon too about specific shared element transitions between different controllers, they call them. So have a look at that. And the last thing is don't be like me, the kid with that Linux desktop. Don't show off. Great power, great responsibility, all of that. There's some serious UX gains to be had here. So I'll finish things up. You can find me on Twitter here or GitHub there. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Nick Butcher for helping me with this talk. He was really, really useful. But yeah, thanks very much. Any questions? If anyone wants to ask questions, please just jump on down to the mic over there.
So based on your experience, what's the best way to reorganize all the code once you're done? As in how to make it as reusable, isolated, and organized as possible, especially when you're dealing with several members in your team and you don't want to, crowd the...
You don't want to butt heads. Yeah, that can get really tricky. So like I was saying before, I think you start by building it in Java, hack it together, get it working, and then a really good part of that is then say, okay, well, I'm going to put this inside of XML, where it's not going to bump heads, and maybe I can think about making it in a more like modular way, if I'm understanding the question, right, where people can then start modifying that module that you've made in a way to maybe sort of compose things together as well. XML is pretty useful for that.
Okay. Thanks, and thanks for the presentation.
No one else curious? No one else had problems? Cool bananas. Thanks very much, everyone. I'll catch you around.